Hi, my name is Emily Stutzman-Jones. I'm the Academic Director at the Institute for Sustainable Practice at Lipscomb, and I'm excited to introduce the November 18th Collaborative Conversation hosted by the Institute for Sustainable Practice as part of the College of Leadership and Public Services annual fall seminar series, Collaborative Conversations. If you've been with our seminar series before, even if you haven't, you might have heard that we tackle complicated and multi-dimensional topics from different disciplinary lenses. So I'm going to be bringing the disciplines of rural sociology and environmental science to consider the topic of race, which is our 2016 topic. So a little bit about myself. I studied rural sociology and human dimensions of forestry and natural resources at Auburn University, and I grew up in Tampa, Florida. As we're talking about home and place, that will be relevant. I love the beach. I love Florida. I love Florida's diverse ecosystems. Being a Florida native is definitely a big part of who I am. So I chose the title Where We Call Home because home is something that unites us all. The concept of home we all can recognize is not just a place. It is relationships, it is people, it is experiences, it's memories, it's dreams for the future. It's a sense of community, it's a sense of identity. On the other hand, homelessness is such a wound on so many levels. It's more than just the loss or the absence of a space to call home. It is it's a loss of security and identity in many cases. If we're actually getting to know each other, I might invite you into my home, and I might tell you about my home, tell you about the place that I grew up in, the way that shaped me. We are all incredibly shaped by our homes. Our physical houses or residences, which might be a house or might be some other form of space, our communities, the nature of our communities, the power dynamics in our communities, and our values like community and our centers of hospitality, our home relationships, all revolve around the places that we live. So home is very powerful, and I wanted to address the topic of land and of place and of space and of neighborhoods and communities and kind of our geographic arrangement and the ways that race influences our geographic arrangement by focusing on the idea of home. So when we're talking about race and communities of place, we are recognizing that groups of people based on race historically and presently occupy different spaces. We have concepts of neighborhoods that are ethnically defined. We have concepts of different sides of the tracks, these spatially defined explanations, and that are shaped by not just individuals but by communities, by collective forces, economic forces, religious forces, mostly economic and political forces. So, and some policies. And we'll talk about some of the things that preserve racial segregation, that perpetuate it, as well as some work that is being done to offer equality of opportunity. What does it mean to both preserve ethnically and racially identifying neighborhoods, and for the special and unique qualities that those and the cohesion that happens there while offering equality of opportunity to all. So I'm a sociologist, and one of the big questions that I'm interested in is how do forces beyond the individual shape options and life chances. So when we are talking about race, it's easy to get personal, and we are not doing that in this conversation. So places we call home in and around Nashville. So the two speakers that are going to be speaking in our November 17th evening. One is Connor Bailey, and he's bringing the perspective of the rural Southeast. Why are we talking about rural counties and forestry and agriculture in Nashville? Well, this is our regional history, and it's definitely the racial circumstances, beginning with slavery and the development of the South, have a huge impact on where African Americans live historically and presently. We'll talk a little bit about resettlement communities, some FDR New Deal era programs to offer freed slaves and their descendants the opportunity to purchase land. And then we'll also talk about some of the processes since then leading to black land loss. If you remember reading Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry as a child, you'll recognize the importance of land culturally in that story and as a term of family identity. But it's also really important to recognize that land and property ownership in general is a huge foundation for stability. It's a huge foundation for the ability to build wealth, the ability to put down roots and really be a stable community. It's not just, feel-good realtor speak to talk about the importance of home ownership within a community and the stability and the security, both economic and social, that ownership brings. So we'll talk about some of that. We'll talk about that historically and presently. There's this fascinating and very spatially defined geographic distribution of people. So one of the things you'll notice in this map is that there's this kind of band that goes from southern Virginia to kind of Mobile, South Mississippi area that is this band of cotton-producing counties. It's a band of soils that are highly agriculturally productive. They're rich, they're black, showing that they have a high organic matter content. So they are actually left over from when the coastline of North America used to be right along that line. You might have heard that Florida has spent most of its history underwater, and history of the globe, and this is that previous coastline. So those rich soils are literally the result of the crustaceans that inhabited the coastline, that lived and died there, and then their little bodies became the soil. So it's highly agriculturally productive, and as a result, it was areas where plantations were settled by people who practiced plantation agriculture. Plantation agriculture being a major user of slave labor. So we see this band that coordinated with the location and distribution of slave populations. So you'll see this other soils-related band, this dark part right along where the Mississippi River drains through, the Arkansas Delta, Mississippi Delta, Louisiana, and the impact of slave-based agriculture production on the distribution of African Americans today. So so one of the things that we notice is that historically most freed slaves stayed in their same geographic opportunity area. That was where they that was their home, and so that was their opportunity to begin to carve out a livelihood through the sharecropping system. It's also where the majority of black-owned land in the United States is still in these counties. This is called the Black Belt, and it's called the Black Belt for two reasons. One, the soil is rich and black, has that high organic content, and it's also overwhelmingly inhabited by African Americans. and what's interesting too is to be able to overlay maps of high poverty counties that align with these soils maps, that align with these cotton producing maps, that align with these maps that depicted where slaves, where the majority of slaves were pre-Civil War. So what we also see is still the codified names on roads and maps, legacy of legacy of discrimination. These were also states where Jim Crow laws predominated and really restricted the ability of African Americans to exercise their freedoms. So I was driving, and I'm including this picture because I was driving with my cousins in this rural part of Jackson County, North Florida, cotton-producing county, and it's where they lived, and it's where I go to visit my grandparents, my grandmother's brothers and sisters and their children and grandchildren. And my cousin, who's in middle school at the time, said something about Browntown, and I said, "You don't really call it Browntown, right?" And she's like, "No, like the sign says Browntown Road. This is our place, not our place because she's not white. I mean, she is white, but this idea that even in 2016 there are still places that nobody has come to the political and moral choice to say, maybe we should rename this road, right? So the history of segregation and the present spatially defined segregation are still very real in many rural places in the Southeast. And there's this conversation over voluntary or involuntary segregation. We talk about, when refugees from a specific country come to Nashville, they want to live with people who speak their language and who eat their foods and who are like them. And so we've got this kind of voluntary segregation explanation. But what I'm hoping to help us consider are those forces beyond the individual that shape those options, and things like living in a community where names are still racially, names on streets and counties and stuff are still racially defined, where the most predominant slave-owning landowner is the name of the county. Those are the kind of forces that are still very much at work, and those forces are shaping opportunities in overt and covert ways. So we're talking about that. Another person who's going to be speaking is Adrienne Harris, and she's at the mayor's office. She's going to be talking about the history of Nashville and how after the Civil War, neighborhoods were settled by newly freed African Americans, and how those communities were built, how racial segregation was a factor in where people lived, and the kind of the history of those neighborhoods, some of the major trends in those neighborhoods, some of the assets and some of the challenges, as well as some items in the news. So things like the Jefferson Street renewal, and ideas around what can we do to become, to really show that we are all Nashville, and this growth that we're experiencing. How can this be done in a way that is that all Nashvillians benefit from? Because we're certainly all the effects of growth are not felt the same by all. So here's a racial dot map of Davidson County. So this is how you read the dot map. The white people are coded as a blue dot. So every single human being in the census of 2010, I believe, got a dot in the way that this map was done. So you can trace the you can see the river where like nobody lives, right, winding through Nashville. And so white people are coded as blue, African American people are coded as green, Asian Americans are coded as red, Hispanics orange, and all other racial categories are coded as brown. So you've got this map that we really see some interesting trends, both in racial distribution as well as population density, right? So the darker areas are where population density is higher, and the areas where dots are more spread out, people are also more spread out. So this is this stuff Adrienne Harris is going to be talking about kind of follows these trends that we see, as well as some things that are being done to ensure or to address racial disparity within the city of Nashville. So what does this all have to do with sustainability? So you heard me talk a little bit about the impact of soil on our history as a country, on our history as a region, and where people live and where people call home. So the natural world is intersecting with our society. Places shape people. This is true in rural areas, and it's true in urban areas, and it's true in in the west and the east and the north and the south. That places shape people. So sustainability considers multiple lenses and multiple forms of value. So we're interested in social values and economic values and natural values, and overall we're interested in the well-being of humans, as well as the continued flourishing of the natural world and of all species. So we've got this overlaying of natural resources and human resources. Sometimes it's this trend is actually consistent over time. The areas with that high agricultural production value, based on their rich soil, are areas where there is high degree of income inequality, high degree of social inequality. It's been called the curse of good soil, and so we see that in the Mississippi Delta. We see that across the Black Belt. So we're interested in ways that institutions, that organizations, cultures make up collective life, and the ways that those things influence human well-being. So I'm a firm believer that there are many opportunities for multiple disciplines to come together to address the challenges that we face as a society, and that a strong understanding of history and of sociology and of our natural and ecological systems can inform good decision making. So those are some of the things we're going to be talking about on November 17th. I hope you can come, tell your friends. It's open to the public, and I look forward to seeing you there. Thanks.